The film opens in September 2020. Armed soldiers arrive at a snow-covered abandoned apartment complex where a monster-like monster snarls around. A man emerges from the ruins, ignoring the soldiers' warning to stop as a team of snipers takes position. Despite being shot multiple times in the chest, he barely flinches and keeps moving. We flash back a month to when Cha Hyun-soo arrives in town, living alone and keeping to himself, barely acknowledging the security guard outside. In his apartment, he sits by the window, curtains fluttering. Lost in thought, Hyun-soo contemplates ending his life, but instead goes to the rooftop, staring over the edge. Hyun-soo is momentarily distracted by a girl named Lee Eun-yu practicing ballet across the way. She steps in gum, notices him watching, and bluntly tells him not to die in the building, suggesting he do it elsewhere to avoid inconveniencing others. Elsewhere in the building, Sang-wook is seen smoking in his room while torturing a man bound in tape on the floor. The man struggles to breathe as Sang-wook extinguishes his cigarette in his mouth with chilling cruelty. Hyun-soo receives a message notifying him that he's been selected as a tester for an upcoming game remake, with instructions to visit G-Tower on August 25th. Later that evening, when he goes to pick up a package, he instead discovers a trail of blood and ramyeon noodles leading to a woman desperately pleading for help. As Hyun-soo approaches his door for a delivery, he's horrified to see his neighbor eating her cat. Panicked, he retreats to his room, only to get a video call from her, tearfully claiming her cat is missing and begging him to open the door. When he asks to see her arms, her demeanor shifts and she scurries away, blood dripping from her nose. When Hyun-soo steps outside, the woman is gone. Instead, he collapses in front of Sang-wook, who is standing near Jisoo's door, somehow bending the metal. Unsure of what to do, Jisoo grabs a baseball bat. After emerging from her room, she meets Sang-wook, who comments that she had been ramming into the door. With the security guard gone, doors locked, and a killer on the loose, the residents gather in the atrium to plan their next move. In the manager's office, firefighter Yi Kyung tries to call emergency services, but the lines are busy. They accidentally trigger the emergency lights, opening the main gate. A strange monster smashes through the glass with a monstrous arm, reminiscent of Resident Evil, and goes on a rampage. Eun-hyuk takes charge, ordering the shutters closed to keep the monster at bay. Ji-kyung barely manages to force the monster away just in time. As the residents regroup, they realize the world outside is overrun by monsters. One monster growls protein, confirming their reality has flipped upside down. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo, standing by the window, suddenly starts bleeding profusely from his nose. At home, Hyun-soo, bearing scars from self-harm, isolates himself, playing video games and ignoring his mother's pleas to join a family trip. Tensions rise, leading to an argument that results in a car crash. As the sole survivor, Hyun-soo is left with 30 million won, which he dismisses angrily as insufficient. In the present, Sang-wook is attacked by a monstrous girl on the stairwell. After a brutal fight, he leaves her in a bloody heap. Meanwhile, Soo-ung helps Yi Kyung move a body from the hallway, sending a final picture to the deceased's family. In the basement, Jisoo encounters the security guard, who, laughing maniacally and bleeding, calls out for manager Han. She instinctively strikes him before Eun-hyuk intervenes to save her. Sang-wook's arrival shifts the atmosphere. Seeing his bite wound, the other residents recoil before he's tasered and knocked out. Meanwhile, Hyun-soo, struggling with a bleeding nose, goes online to learn more about the so-called curse. Just as people speculate wildly about its origin, the internet suddenly goes down, halting his search. In a tense moment, Hyun-soo accidentally lets a monstrous monster with a half-formed head into his room. He manages to stay calm until the monster eventually stumbles out. Meanwhile, Jae-hoon and Ji-soo discover a beaten man in the elevator. Recognizing him as Sang-wook's captive, Jae-hoon chooses not to reveal this and grabs a hammer, joining the others in their search. Hyun-soo makes a daring choice to help the children in the apartment, as a giant eyeball attached to a tentacle wraps around him. Squeezing tightly, his neighbor Do-sik intervenes, killing the monster and saving Hyun-soo. Do-sik warns him to stay quiet, as noise attracts the monsters, and together they help the kid. Do-sik's strategy comes into play when Hyun-soo uses a bouncy ball to distract the half-headed monster. He sneaks up and electrocutes it with a makeshift spear. Despite the initial attack, the monster remains standing, but Hansu quickly regains its attention and delivers a final blow to its neck, finally bringing the monster down. Suk-hyun makes his way into the convenience store, where Yi-kyung is also present. The food inside is all they have left, and both Yi-kyung and Eun-hyuk are already considering how to ration it to last during their confinement. However, Suk-hyun is unwilling to share. Meanwhile, Hansu rushes down the hallway and reaches the two kids, only to discover their father has died. Things quickly go downhill as Hansu's condition deteriorates, causing him to bleed heavily from the nose once more, but this time, his eyes have turned black. The scene begins with a repeat of the family trip, but this time, Hansu is in the car, coldly telling his parents they should die. It's soon revealed to be a nightmare as a dark version of himself menacingly stares back from a mirror. Hansu wakes up, jolted by the unsettling dream, but his eyes remain blackened. The situation escalates as another monster appears at the apartment, tearing through walls in pursuit of the kids. Jisoo and Jae-hoon hear the chaos and rush to help Hansu, managing to drag him to safety. They notice his blackened eyes, which suddenly fade as he weakly asks for help, blood staining his mouth. Just then, the half-headed monster returns, but the kids manage to escape as the two monsters begin battling each other. Seizing the distraction, the kids flee to another room, but their relief is short-lived as the giant monster chases after them. Meanwhile, during a televised address, the president suddenly starts bleeding from his nose and loses control, heightening the residents' terror and sense of impending doom. The group bands together, managing to distract the monster long enough to reach Doo-sik's apartment. A seemingly recovered Myung-suk also arrives, having shaken off the same black-eyed infection Hyun-soo had. Jae-hoon lures the giant monster to a window, where it lunges and falls to what appears to be its demise. Jisoo initially prepares to attack Myung-suk, noticing her black eyes, but when Myung-suk asks about the kids, Jisoo hesitates and decides to help her. Myung-suk then insists on going alone to room 1408, where the kids are hidden. In room 1408, the group, including the kids, shares a meal, reflecting on their situation and contemplating their next move. Later, the resident from room 802, previously beaten by Sang-wook, arrives with a suitcase full of food. He shares it with everyone, but the blood-stained lining raises suspicions among some. Eun-hyuk announces over the tannoy that it's safe to head to the first floor. However, chaos ensues when Jin-ok sees her daughter running towards the apartment block, throwing the residents into a panic at the front doors. Suwon rushes outside, but a tentacle suddenly shoots out, impaling both him and Jin-ok's daughter, draining their life force and leaving their bodies in a bloody heap. Jin-ok blames Eun-hyuk for the tragedy, and he's visibly shaken, struggling to maintain control over the panicked residents. Meanwhile, Jisoo and Jae-hoon prepare to leave in the morning, armed with a makeshift shield fashioned from a cupboard door. Just before they depart, Hyun-soo decides to join them, receiving thanks from the two kids he saved. It's August 18th, day 4 of their confinement. The residents begin working together to build makeshift barricades for the doorways, realizing that their survival depends on unity. Ji-kyung has a close encounter with a monster in the vents, reminiscent of the liquor from Resident Evil. She narrowly escapes its spider-like tentacle, but ends up separated from her phone when Sang-won calls. Eventually, she returns to Eun-hyuk, only to angrily kick him for not warning her about the lurking monster. A news report announces that the military will take over all security and civil affairs. While the infection's spread is unclear, the monsters are known to have strong regenerative abilities. However, during a brief period called the Golden Hour, these monsters can be killed by incineration. The broadcast ends with a soldier urging viewers to survive good luck. Hyun-soo continues to have nightmares and wakes up in Yoon-yu's room, where Eun-hyuk is present. Eun-hyuk reveals that he fell from the 9th floor and miraculously woke up 3 hours later, saved during the Golden Hour. He warns Hyun-soo that the challenges ahead will only get tougher. Tensions escalate when Hyun-soo heads to the main atrium, where the residents are gathered. Suk-hyun, seeing Hyun-soo as a threat, pushes for his removal. The group votes on Hyun-soo's fate, but the deciding vote turns out to be invalid, infuriating Suk-hyun. Suddenly, Suk-hyun becomes infected, bleeding heavily from his nose, and when he regains consciousness, he finds himself in isolation alongside Hansu. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Do-sik opens a bathroom door and discovers a massive sack that appears to be holding a child inside. Stunned by the sight, he holds his gun, unsure of what to do next. Do-sik struggles with what to do about the discovery in the bathroom, haunted by Myung-suk's story about her daughter. Ultimately, he decides to close the door and stay put for now. Meanwhile, Un-hyuk, knowing he can't support Sang-wook's dangerous mission, reluctantly lets him and Hyun-soo head back into the main area of the building. As they move forward, Un-hyuk instructs Hyun-soo to prioritize rescuing Do-sik, even suggesting that the kids are secondary. A cold but calculated decision that he discusses with Yoon-yu, believing Hyun-soo could be their strongest asset in the coming fight. It turns out the earlier votes regarding Hyun-soo's fate were legitimate, not rigged as Yoon-hyuk had feared. During a conversation, Yoon-suk mentions a blog post from Krukru that speculates this isn't a disease, but a curse. Upstairs, Sang-wook and Hyun-soo navigate through burning rooms when they're suddenly pursued by a lightning-fast monster with a pulsing orange heart. Unexpectedly, they're joined by two new allies, a crossbow-wielding girl named Yuri and her elderly patient. Sang-wook uses the keys he swiped to enter room 802, discovering horrifying photos of beaten children, exposing Seong-jae's depravity. Later, in the basement, Seong-jae ambushes Sang-wook with a hammer, but Sang-wook overpowers and kills him. He drags Seong-jae's body to the entrance, intending to dispose of it outside, but Yoon-hyuk insists he stays inside. Instead, Sang-wook bravely drags Minju and Suwong's bodies inside, allowing the residents to give them a proper burial. The group mourns their loss together. Afterward, Yi-kyung decides to confront her demons alone. As she ventures out, the remaining residents reflect on what it means to be human, and ponder whether this curse is simply the next step in evolution. Reflecting on Sang-wook's past, we see the moments that led him to take on the task of taking down Seong-jae. Initially he refused, but a picture of a young girl and the pleas of a grief-stricken father changed his mind. While most residents focus on building traps, Yi-kyung decides to leave. Flashbacks to June 2020 show her working with her fiancé, Chief Physician Sang-won. In July, after being denied entry to a fire to search for victims, she resigns, handing in her badge. Back in the present, Yi-kyung speeds off on her bike as Eun-hyuk and Jae-hoon have a heart-to-heart. Jae-hoon reveals that he was once an alcoholic, but religion helped him through his darkest times, foreshadowing the challenges still to come. For now, the residents establish 3 basic rules for survival: always move in pairs, check their temperatures every night at 8 p.m., and stay vigilant. While most residents accept these rules, Do-sik is uneasy about using Hyun-soo as a weapon. Meanwhile, Suk-hyun begins to transform into a monster, with hair flowing down to the floor like a grotesque version of Cousin It. He shuffles forward and begs his wife, Sun-young, to kill him. Seizing the opportunity after years of abuse, Sun-young takes an iron pipe and repeatedly slams it across his head, releasing years of pent-up anger in a single, blood-soaked act of revenge. Yi-kyung makes her way to Sang-won's office, where she discovers that the Krukru blog is actually his creation. He has been documenting the curse. As she reads his findings, soldiers suddenly appear, seize her, and take her away. Un-hyuk then enters the room and discusses the monster situation with Hyun-soo. He explains that they need to find a way to survive and mentions that, according to the Krukru blog, meanwhile, Yi-kyung is strung up by the soldiers who interrogate her about what she read. She attempts to bargain with them, offering to show them someone resisting the transformation into a monster. As the tension builds, Hyun-soo's condition worsens. He begins losing the battle against the infection, eventually turning into a strange oozing cocoon while hanging upside down from the ceiling. The residents quickly knock him down, but their troubles are far from over. The lightning-fast glowing monster from earlier suddenly bursts out of the traps and chases the group into the basement. At the same time, the liquor-like monster returns, pursuing one of the kids through the hallways. Just as things look dire, Do-sik arrives, weapon in hand, ready to fight back. Downstairs, the group piles into a car and races off as monsters swarm around them. Jae-hoon and Jisoo work together while Eun-hyuk drives. Gil-seob, armed with a flamethrower, manages to fend off the monsters, turning the area into a fiery inferno of screaming monsters. Upstairs, Eun-yu rallies the residents to set traps and work together against the threat. Do-sik bravely holds off a monster, suffering a sharp tentacle impaling his leg. The group uses a Molotov cocktail to burn the monster, giving Do-sik time to crawl to safety. The group, now appreciative of Hansu, apologizes for initially locking him up. A new problem arises when the water tank is contaminated. In the basement, Eun-hyuk and Do-sik assess the damage to their car and plan a risky venture outside to gather resources. Meanwhile, Ji-kyung is rescued by soldiers, who reveal that survivors of the monster infection are known as special infectees. Back at the apartment complex, the group prepares to execute their plan. As the residents gear up to venture outside, there's a calm before the storm. Jisoo plays her guitar while Hyunsu listens, Jae-hoon drinks soju, and Sang-wook apologizes to Seong-wan for hitting him. The mood darkens when Jisoo collapses from appendicitis, and with no sterile equipment or doctor, her condition appears dire. Yuri volunteers to assist with the surgery as the group scrambles to save Jisoo. Outside the room, Eun-hyuk warns Hyunsu that if things go wrong, he must leave to gather the necessary resources. As Hyunsu climbs into the reinforced car, memories of a troubled past flood back, his childhood marred by bullying and regret. Despite his father's intervention, an old friend blamed him for his misfortunes, leading Hyunsu to self-harm and despair. In the present, just as Hyunsu steels himself to face the outside world, a giant monster suddenly slams into the car, flipping it over and leaving him in a perilous situation. Hyunsu wakes to find the towering behemoth back, angrier than ever. Gil-seob tries to fend it off with a Molotov cocktail, but starts bleeding from his nose as the monster looms over him, seemingly sealing his fate. Just in time, Ji-kyung arrives, ramming the monster with a fire truck, saving Gil-seob. The monster fights back, trying to tip the truck. Inside, Jae-hoon watches over Eun-hyuk as he completes Jisoo's surgery, leaving her fate uncertain. The team returns inside, using Jin-kyung's fire truck for fresh water. Gil-seob scolds Yuri for venturing out, though she now has an inhaler thanks to Ji-kyung. Jae-hoon, struggling with old habits, starts drinking again, but Sang-wook, understanding his battle, sits with him and encourages him not to lose hope. When Hyunsu wakes, Ji-kyung questions him about when his symptoms first appeared. He admits he just wanted to live, contrasting with his past suicidal thoughts. Ji-kyung reveals she encountered soldiers and informed them about Hyunsu, explaining why they've been asking questions about him. Afterward, Ji-kyung takes a shower, struggling with guilt. The soldiers promised her freedom and more information about Sang-won in exchange for delivering Hyunsu to them. They gave her a tracker to locate them, believing Hyunsu might be the key to their survival, and then allowed her to leave. When Sun-young reveals she's infected, the group decides to keep her inside, but in isolation for safety. With Sun-young isolated, the residents pass the time by telling scary stories, but the mood shifts when a runaway soldier stumbles into the apartment, convulsing and coughing up blood. Hyunsu rushes to stop him, but the situation escalates as flies swarm around the guard's face. Jae-hoon intervenes, but tragically loses his arm in the struggle. Despite his injury and broken sword, Jae-hoon presses on, determined to protect the others. In a heroic act, he grabs the security guard and stabs him, holding him back in the elevator. As the situation worsens, Jae-hoon sacrifices himself, urging the others to throw fire into the lift. As Jisoo slowly recovers, she recalls Jae-hoon's final words, where he confessed that he liked her. Overcome with grief, she sits against the wall, struggling to process his death. Eun-yu arrives with chocolates, hoping to lift Jisoo's spirits. Despite her own struggles, Jisoo finds it especially hard to cope with Jae-hoon's loss. However, Eun-yu encourages her to carry on, telling her not to wallow in misery, and handing her the severed blade as a symbol of hope. Meanwhile, Sang-wook pours a bottle of soju over Jae-hoon's grave in a symbolic farewell, while Sun-young counts down the 5 days left until she hopes to overcome the worst of her infection. The truck crashes through the front doors, and a group of men emerge, killing the runaway soldier and hunting down the remaining residents. The residents are trapped in a makeshift prison on the ground floor, confined by a penciled outline. The situation turns deadly when Ji-yoon is shot as a brutal warning for stepping out of line. Their leader, Young-seop, introduces himself, revealing through flashbacks a dark past and declaring that humans are the real monsters. Ji-kyung and Sang-wook take down soldiers, sparking chaos as the residents fight back. Hansu leads the charge, but the situation escalates when Jung-seop holds On-hyuk at gunpoint. Unaware of the turmoil below, Hansu awakens on the rooftop, only to be shot again by Young-seop as he staggers away. As the new leader extends a bloodied hand to strike a deal with Hansu, a military helicopter flies overhead, dropping leaflets about the infection. As the lift descends, Hansu prepares to reunite with the other residents, uncertain of what lies ahead. Hansu emerges from the elevator with a hooded figure, surprising the group, who quickly raise their weapons. He orders them to lower their arms, revealing the criminal as a fellow special infect like him. With tensions eased, Hansu clarified the situation. Yoon-hyuk and Yoon-yu grapple with the moral dilemma posed by a military leaflet offering the possibility of betraying Hansu to save themselves. Suspecting it's a trap, Yoon-hyuk tries unsuccessfully to warn Hansu. Frustrated, Yoon-hyuk turns to Yi-kyung, who shows him the tracker she's been holding, still unsure whether to use it. Meanwhile, Sang-wook, weakened, grabs Yuri and rushes her to the atrium. As he does, a hooded figure attacks, knocking him down and taking Yuri, disappearing into the wilderness amid gunfire. Yuri and Sang-wook bear the brunt of the assault, but others are in danger too. In desperation, Hansu lets the infection take over, sprouting a wing from his arm. Do-sik, caught in the crossfire, sacrifices himself to save Hansu from fully transforming. His sacrifice works, and Hansu returns to his human form, collapsing in grief as he realizes Do-sik has become the father figure he never had. Later, Yuri finds that Gil-seop has passed away in his sleep. The residents carry him to a grave site, where they discover an underground bunker just as snow begins to fall, signaling a blizzard. As the blizzard intensifies, the army surrounds the apartment complex, ready to storm the building. The survivors huddle around a fire, desperate to decide their next move. They plead with Hansu to stay, but he remains determined to venture outside. Down in the bunker, grenades explode, prompting the army to open fire. The residents scramble into the basement, searching for an escape, but Hansu chooses to face the outside world on his own. On-hyuk tries desperately to stop him, but it's too late. Hansu is already gone. As the gate slams shut, Yoon-hyuk sacrifices himself, tears mingling with blood as the building collapses. Underground, Bomb the dog leads the group to safety. They emerge into the desolate world above, only to face an army of soldiers. Ji-kyung steps forward, revealing their deal with the soldiers isn't over. The group is loaded onto a truck, bound for a survival camp, but Ji-kyung chooses not to join them, urging them to survive. The movie ends with a battered Hansu recovering, shocked to see Sang-wook driving the truck. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.